on a chemistry learning plan about how a pressure cooker works or why it cooks food so fast. Many of you might have joined us for a webinar 2 weeks ago that was also focused on this plan, but as you could see, there's a different implementation focus. And so the last one that we had on this plan was really about using Google Classroom to implement this learning plan. And this one today is about formative assessment and feedback to support students in demonstrating evidence of mastery. So before we really jump into the rest of the session, we're going to do some introductions and agenda. All of you already had a chance to introduce yourselves, and thank you for doing so. Once again, it's really great to see returning and new people. Always excited about both. And I'll take a moment to introduce myself right now. My name is John Salazar. Again, I know many of you, but meeting some of you for the first time. I've been working for New Visions for close to 6 years now, working mainly to support earth science and chemistry instruction for all the schools that we work with. And my colleague, Libby, who her username for this session is MVPS, she's gonna be the person that you can reach out to if you have any questions, any technical difficulties. All you need to do is go to the chat window, and at the bottom you could click where it says everyone is the default, but if you click on that, you could choose MVPS specifically, and that's Libby. So just reach out to her if you have any sort of issues, and I'm sure she'll be glad to help you out with that. And so as I mentioned that we've been doing several webinars over the last few weeks. And I work on earth science and chemistry, so it wasn't a series that was all chemistry throughout. We did have one of the webinars focused on an earth science learning plan, but they all had these different implementation foci that I think could be relevant to any science teacher that's teaching in this current context. So we had, again, Google Classroom. Last week we focused on peer-to-peer discussion, and this week we're focusing on assessment, formative assessment and evidence of mastery. So, I'm curious, some of you have joined us in previous sessions, or maybe even if you haven't, I'm curious, do these issues resonate with you? Is this something that you've been having conversations about with your colleagues at your school? Or is this something you've tried and had either successes or challenges with? So if you could take a moment, if you have a response or a reaction to these different focuses that we've had, please go ahead and share that in the chat window. All right, I'll give it another few seconds. There we go. Tripty. Oh, that's great. Using Google, the question feature to get kids to respond to one another. So, I mean, related to today's session is about formative assessment / feedback that you're mentioning here. Always great to have kids be able to give feedback to each other. And then I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly, but Maduri is saying that they tried out Google Classroom and had some struggles in the beginning, but I think like anything, it just gets easier and easier over time. It looks like they're doing better with it now. Yeah, and use it as a platform to give feedback. Awesome. Also very related to today's session. Okay, I'm not seeing any more comments, and that's totally fine. We're going to go ahead and move on to the next slide here. So today's agenda, first we're going to start with just thinking about why does formative assessment matter? And of course, it's something that all of us, I think, as educators have always done to support our students. But I think in particular today, we're also going to think about what are the parts of formative assessment that matter most in this current context, and what are the different ways that we could approach it effectively in this current context. We're going to go ahead and take a look at an overview of the pressure cooker learning plan. And we're going to do this with a lens and a formative assessment lens and looking at where there are opportunities to provide students some really targeted feedback. We're not going to get as much into the learning plan this time because many of you joined us last time, but you will get an opportunity to become familiar with it and look at like specific parts of it when we practice giving some feedback a little bit later. And that's the next part of our agenda that you see number 3 there. We're going to look at some samples of student work related or that come from this learning plan, and we're going to practice in groups, thinking about like what are the parts that we want to give in formative assessment, how are we going to do that, and why. And then finally, we're going to have a little bit of debrief and a discussion about how to incorporate formative assessment and feedback. And then we'll have time at the end to fill out the reflection form, which we always appreciate. And myself and I think Libby also can stick around to answer any questions that you might have or just be a thought partner about the stuff that was presented today in the session. So let's get into the goals and agreements. So this is always one of the goals of our webinars, is to introduce teachers to the remote learning instructional model that we're suggesting, and is used to design all of our science learning plans. But this session, as you know, it's particularly focused on formative assessment and how to do that effectively within the context of this learning plan and supporting students in support of students showing evidence of mastery. We're also going to model some remote learning best practices. If you've been part of our previous sessions, you're familiar with this term here, micro routines. And these are just really simple, short routines that some other folks at New Visions have designed to help engage students in discussion and also to help us in these sessions engage in discussion. And then again, because today's is focused on formative assessment, we're going to take a look at checklists that we've developed that correspond to this particular learning plan so that it's clear for you as a teacher, for the students, like what are some of the criteria that you're going to use to give them feedback. And then we'll quickly share again at the end, what are the additional ways that New Visions is here to support teachers in this current remote learning context. And some agreements for the webinar, and these might be familiar to you again if you have been in these sessions, or perhaps they're common across other webinars as well, but we're going to ask you to make sure your microphone is muted unless you're speaking, of course. Keep in mind that we have it set so that all your microphones are automatically muted, and that's just because we want to cut down on the number on the background noise. We have, I think, at least 20 people in the session today. I know Libby has a baby and other people have children, which we love, but we want to make sure that we can all hear each other. But again, make sure that you feel free to unmute yourself if you need to speak up. And Libby already sent the participant agenda in the chat window. There are going to be other resources that she's going to be sending links for. And later on in the session, there is a point where I'm going to ask you to have a few different tabs open. So keep that in mind. I know I always have like 12 tabs open normally. For this session, I made sure I only had narrowed it down to 3. So if you're like me, I might suggest that you close some tabs and make it easy to navigate back and forth. We're going to allow extra wait time since people sometimes might be muted or people are just kind of getting used to using Zoom. So please be patient with each other. And as always, in these sessions, in our in-person sessions, all the resources, slides, materials, the recording, everything's going to be made available to you after the session. So don't worry about that. And then I think this is particularly important for both students, but also for us adults, us educators, is just recognize like how complex and challenging this current situation is. And of course, like some people are maybe navigating it better than others, but we all have different experiences right now. And so again, be patient with each other, assume best intentions, be kind. I'm sure I actually don't have to say that to this group, but we just wanted to mention that. So first item on the agenda, why is formative assessment important right now? So we're going to engage in a little discussion about this. And we're going to use one of those micro routines that I mentioned earlier. This one's called React. And the way that this one works is we're going to read a text. I'm going to read it out loud. You're going to have 30 seconds to think about what your reaction is. And there are a number of different prompts or sentence starters that you can use for this routine, but we're going to use this one in particular that's highlighted in blue. This reminds me of. Then I'm going to give you a minute to share what it reminds you of in the chat window. And I'll give you a little extra time after that to read other people's shares. The one thing I want to mention in addition to that, though, is please be ready to share what you put in the chat window and perhaps elaborate on it. I'm going to call on a couple of you to do that, just based on what I'm seeing in the chat window. Okay, so we're going to get into the 30 seconds where you're going to think of your phrase you're going to use that starts with the sentence starters. This reminds me of. So this is the text, the 30 seconds, don't worry, the 30 seconds isn't starting yet. But I'm going to go ahead and read the text out loud, and then I'm going to give you those 30 seconds to write your phrase. So assessment is often talked about as an instrumental practice related to monitoring / supporting educational achievement. If caring is thought of as a way to make yourself more susceptible to some matters than others, assessment can be a caring practice. It is a way to focus instruction on learner voice, knowledge, and relevant supports. In the process, it can support important relationship building. Analyzing student work is a very powerful process that supports teacher learning. Okay, so 30 seconds to write, 30 seconds now to write your phrase with a sentence starter. Okay, now a minute to go ahead and, actually we're gonna make it 2 minutes as this timer here indicates, a minute to actually type it into the chat window, and then take the other additional minute to go ahead and read some of your colleagues' comments as well. Libby, I muted the music from the timer. Can you still hear me though? No? Oh yeah, okay, good. Great, a lot of interesting and comments that definitely resonate with me. And if you've already commented, please take the next 30 seconds to read some of your colleagues' comments. All right, as I promised earlier, I'm gonna call on a couple of you to just share out what your comment was and perhaps elaborate a little bit further. I'm gonna ask two people here, and forgive me if I don't pronounce it right, Jika, Gjika, and particularly the comment where he says, it reminds me of checkpoints and giving opportunities to make thinking visible. And then the other person, I hope can speak as well. Uh, and forgive me for the pronunciation, Phil Correa. Um, now I'm losing the comment that he made a few different really good comments. But if you could just, just elaborate on your comments in general. I'm not finding the specific one that you shared earlier. So Jika, can you start, please?
Yeah, I see like teaching breaking into smaller parts. So I consider these checkpoints opportunities to have a chance for students to speak about what they are understanding and how they are understanding, and also for the teacher to see what does it mean and how in depth is the student understanding the concept. So it's like, and I also commented that Nicole kind of said that to build a relationship through feedback, that's come up with some type of relationship that is built between teacher and students through this feedback and checkpoints, and also making thinking visible. That's an opportunity for students who have certain ideas but not able to share, given the chance for them to talk and speak about where they are at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, I love a lot of the points you made. And in particular, I think what stood out to me was the part about making student thinking visible, which I think in the classroom context is maybe a little bit easier. But I think that's what we're trying to focus on today is like, how do we make sure that we're able to do that in this current remote learning context? Thank you so much for sharing. And is that, how do you pronounce your name? Make sure you get it right next time.
Jika.
Okay.
Jika.
And then Theo Correa, and you could also correct me on the pronunciation if necessary. Can you just elaborate on your comments in general, particularly what you said about, I think stuff about like relationship building and the benefits of conversation?
Yeah, you said it right, my name, Correa.
Yes.
So conversation, we will provide students changes or chance. We provide chance. They get a chance to develop their skill using the dialect they are comfortable with, and incorporating content with a professional to learn content in formal language.
Mm-hmm. Great. And I think you said something about like relationship building or the benefits of conversation. Maybe I misread.
Yeah, that's correct. Because I believe in conversation. That's the way a student can, like promote, also writing, reading, talk about some topic and learn also new concept or word related to the topic.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, we've heard like some similar things about like the relationship building part is like it's a form of care, like it said in the quote, right? Like I think when you are able to take the time to give a student very targeted feedback that's like specifically for that student, I think I would imagine that they really appreciate that and kind of just helps you connect with students better. So thank you so much for the two of you, to the two of you.
You're welcome.
All right, let's go ahead and keep going here. So I'm showing this slide because as we just used this micro routine called React. We've used one called Recall in previous sessions. I think at least one other. There's one called Defend, which I think is particularly useful for looking at scientific claims and asking students to provide evidence for a particular claim. So I just want to invite you to, after the session, go ahead and go to this site and explore this extensive list of microroutines that are geared for different situations. And that's all explained. The people that at New Visions that wrote these did a really wonderful job of explaining the purpose of each one, how they can be modified for different subject areas. They have videos, slides, everything. So I encourage you to check those out if you think they might be useful for you and your students. So just to add on to what we brought up already about why focus on assessment now. And so first, there's some practical reasons. I mean, we all know that the Regents exam has been canceled. And so for students to get that exemption, they're going to have to demonstrate mastery of different content and the different content areas. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting them in that process of demonstrating evidence of mastery through formative assessment and feedback. We also have more time right now to invest. I mean, teachers were bringing up the idea of like, we're not giving quite as much work, so we could let the students, first of all, not be overwhelmed, but do more in-depth work, which allows us the opportunity to give more in-depth feedback as well. And why don't we have to worry, or we don't have to worry about having everyone complete work at the same time, so students all have different situations at home where that's going to lead to a different pace of work, or just like through different backgrounds, it's going to lead to a different pace at work. And so it's really nice that, again, you could provide them formative or feedback through formative assessment during that time so they can revise their work at their own pace. And also, as it said in the quote we've already discussed, we can frame assessment as a practice of care and engagement. We can use it to have conversations with not only students, but families as well. And I just want to stress that, like, while we hope that some of the tools and resources or different practices that we're sharing in this webinar will be useful, I think just as important, it's about developing a shared disposition about formative assessment and this idea of like using it as a form of care. We hope that that resonates with you as well. And that's something that you take away from this session. All right, so we're going to do a fly overview of this chemistry learning plan. So I'm going to show you, oops, actually before I show you that, I'm not going to go to the website right now, but I want to make sure that everybody knows how to access all our learning plans. And so as you could see the URLs in big bold red at the top, and so you could explore that later. But in particular, I want to point out that you can access the curriculum resources here, and that's for all content areas, including science, of course, or the core content areas at least. And then I would also invite you to explore some of these supports for teaching with technology, and then just looking at a list of some ed tech resources that folks here at New Visions or teachers that we work with have found useful in this context, or even in the classroom context before. And we've sort of already touched upon a lot of these things that are the things that are happening, the changes that are happening in this current context, but we want to make sure that it's clear that New Visions is paying attention to all these different changes, and we're trying to really not only looking at policy changes, but just listening to teachers about what the needs are. And the social emotional part of this is just, I would argue more important even than the academic part of it currently. And so we're really trying to provide resources that help students make sense of the current situation in their communities and their lives, whether it's like some of the COVID-19 resources that we've developed as a science team, or just making sure that whatever phenomenon or question that the students are exploring as they engage with these resources is actually relevant to their lives. I mean, engagements have been particularly challenging, and so we want to make sure that we're doing as much as possible to engage them. Again, we need to make sure that the resources provide an opportunity to show evidence of mastery, because that's going to make sure that students are able to be exempt from the Regents exam and get their credit. And then we know everybody, teachers and students, they all have different contexts, different access to technology, different facility with technology, different schedules. And so we want to make sure that there's both opportunities for asynchronous and synchronous instruction within our resources. And before we finally do get into that overview, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page about these terms that may be new to some people. So synchronous instruction just means online in real time, like we're doing right now. We're all at the same place at the same time. Asynchronous instruction is students working in their own time at their own pace. And then finally, blended, as you might guess, is a combination of those two. So this is an overview of this particular chemistry learning resource. But as I mentioned earlier, we have a particular instructional model that we're using to design all our science resources, and they all follow the same flow here. So there's a launch, and I'll get into the details of each one of these parts in a moment. There's a launch, there's work time, There's a check-in to give feedback, whether it's teacher to student feedback or student to student feedback, or even self-reflection. And then there's a wrap-up to bring closure to the plan. And so I'm going to get into detail within the context of this plan, so this might make a little more sense after I do that. Oh, and one thing I want to also mention as we go through this, remember today's lens is opportunities for formative assessment and how to give feedback. So as I'm reading through or explaining some of these slides, think about where are the different opportunities for formative assessment. So the launch consists of this phenomenon about like why a pressure cooker cooks so much faster than a regular pot with no lid on the stove. And students are going to first kind of just get engaged with it by sharing some dishes that they've either prepared themselves or they've seen prepared that they know of are prepared in pressure cookers. And then they watch a video that's just showing like how easy and fast it is to prepare, in this case, a really delicious chicken noodle soup. And then they share some of their initial ideas about why is this happening? Why were they able to cook this? I think it's in about 10 minutes or it might be like 13 minutes, but a relatively fast time. Then they would get into the work time where first they're starting out by either, I think in many cases, students have already engaged with these concepts. There might be a review, but it's designed for also students that have not, and this is like maybe just a first time learning. But in this case, they learn first about how the solids, liquids, and gases are different at a molecular level. So basically about phases on a molecular level and phase changes. And they do this by engaging with a PhET simulation that shows these different processes and how they happen. And then we ask them to create some diagrams that show what's going on with different ingredients in a pressure cooker, particularly the water and some ice that might be in the frozen foods. And the second part of the work time is now shifting or transitioning and building upon that first part and really getting to what causes pressure inside a container or in particular a pressure cooker. So again, they use it's a different simulation that's focused on what causes gas pressure at the molecular level. And so they could see all the particles moving around, and there's different aspects of this that really helps them. It's about like the collisions and so on and so forth. And then again, we ask them to create diagrams that show what causes pressure at a molecular level. And in addition, like how is that leading to food cooking faster? And the check-in time is, again, the opportunity for either peers or teachers to provide students with support. And also you'll see in a checklist that we developed, there's an opportunity for some self-reflection on the part of the students as well. So they're assessing themselves. And this could be done in a number of forms, as somebody mentioned earlier, using Google Classroom as a way for students to respond to each other. But there's a number of high-tech and low-tech ways that I'm sure we've all been working with. And then finally developing a final answer. In this particular learning plan, students would have an opportunity to refine their responses based on that feedback we were just talking about. But then after that, they could watch a video that gets a little bit more into the nitty gritty and maybe some things they might not have thought about what causes or how a pressure cooker works. And they're given the opportunity to note ideas that confirm their thinking, and then the ones that perhaps cause them to refine or change their thinking. And lastly, they really now compare all these things that they learned about a pressure cooker and think about how's that different in a pot with no lid on this stuff. So I'm going to pause talking right there and pose a question. And this is why I said to look at this learning plan with a lens for opportunities for formative assessment. So what is one specific opportunity for formative assessment in this plan? So please take about the next minute to go ahead and share your thoughts about that. Uh, Jika, just to quickly answer your question, if you go to that site with all the micro routines, the people that wrote them like have done a really great job of creating videos and slides and like all the protocols, everything I think that you would need to answer. If not, you could follow up with us. Seeing some comments here, and yeah, are there particular parts of the learning plan that you saw that you might target formative assessment or feedback on? I'm seeing the launch. You just kind of want to see what students' initial ideas are, what they understand, what they don't understand, misconceptions or incomplete ideas. I like that. And so, yeah, a lot of other shares about how, but I think we're also thinking about like where. And somebody else, Verdiginiki, so using the FET simulation to figure out what happened at the molecular level in substances. Okay. Yeah, and we'll be looking at a couple particular points of this learning plan that we would recommend to give some feedback to students. So yeah, people are sharing a lot of great ideas for how, but later we'll also look at where. And I think that's particularly important given the overwhelming nature of this current context. Great, thank you for all your shares. All right, so we're gonna jump into the part where we actually practice giving feedback on some sample student work from specific parts of this learning plan. And so right now I'm just sharing some different ways that you could provide feedback. And this is a list that it's not only been compiled by people at New Visions, but again, as we always do, is we gather ideas that have shown to be effective from our teachers. So it might be just providing feedback through email, text, or a photographic comments. You can make comments directly onto Google Doc through that comment feature. We could work with checklists where both the teacher and the student can go ahead and work through the checklist and make comments about how the student's doing on a particular task. Using a brief video, in last session, we were sharing how to have students engage with discussion and talk to each other through Flipgrid, where they make videos and can respond to each other. But I think that's also a really great opportunity for teachers to provide feedback. One-on-one conferences is something that we've heard teachers have been doing with some students. And then of course, providing like some sort of model or example of what you expect the work to look like to really help students be clear about that in addition to criteria that you might provide. And again, we mentioned like student self-reflection. I think that's, I know I always found that to be really powerful when I incorporated that, started incorporating that into my teaching. It felt like things really changed for the better after that. And how do we fit all this in, right? Like there's a lot to manage right now from both the teacher and the student. And I think just the big takeaway from this slide here is just really think about what are the key things in a particular, let's say, learning sequence that you're having students engage with. Where are the specific parts where you want to provide this timely, brief, and targeted feedback? And again, I mean, this next point kind of also emphasizes that. It's just really giving like 2 to 5 quick specific comments and suggestions for improvement. And then giving them that time to actually revise. And perhaps you might even want to ask the students how they're perceiving the feedback and how, if it's been supportive or not, or how could it improve. And of course, all these different forms of feedback that we were mentioning a couple of slides ago, I think fit into one of these 3 categories. That there's low tech capacity and access. And again, this could be for both teachers and students, modest tech capacity and access, and then high tech capacity and access. And so you could see a number of different things that you can use, anywhere from low tech, where it's just one-on-one conferencing over the phone or email, to high tech, where it's something like I mentioned earlier, where you're using Flipgrid. It's an online platform where you have students create videos and you could give video responses. And that seems to be a really cool thing that people have been finding useful. And all these other ones listed here as well. All right, so we're gonna jump into the practice with giving feedback now. So this is the part where you're gonna have to manage multiple tabs. So be ready for that part. And I'll explain as clearly as possible what that's gonna, what I'm asking you to do as far as that's concerned. And so there are a few things that Libby is going to chat into the chat window. So hopefully you all already opened the pressure cooker learning plan in case you want to access that. But just as important, or maybe more important, is going to be the assessment list for sort of a combination of two tasks that are like culminating for this learning plan. And this is where students are creating different diagrams to demonstrate their understanding of the ideas in this plan. And then we have some sample student work. So there's going to be work from a student A and work from a student B. And then there's slides in the slide deck that are going to be for each one of the groups that we're going to put you into. We're going to put you again in groups of 4. And this is where you're going to respond about what you're giving feedback, which part you're giving feedback to, which student, what's your feedback, and why did you give that feedback? And I'll remind you of that again in just a moment. And it's also on the slides. So I think Libby has chatted all that stuff. Yeah, we got student B, we have student A, the checklist. So again, chat Libby if you're having any sort of issue, but try to open up these 4 different resources right now. So as I sort of already said, make sure you have these ready. All right, so let me explain this as clearly as I can, because I know there's a lot going on right now. But the steps for the breakout room work. Again, you're going to be put into these breakout rooms. There's going to be, I think, like 3 to 4 of you in the room. And the first step is you want to figure out which student are you going to focus on. Just pick one of them, either student A or student B. And you're going to go ahead and indicate that in the slide for your group. And then this could be a snapshot of specific work that you see for, say, for example, student A, or the whole piece of work. It depends on what you want to focus on. But really thinking about like, what are the parts of that work that you think are most key to give feedback on? And then you're going to actually provide that feedback. If you were the student's teacher, what is the feedback you would give that student on this part that you chose? And then finally, number 3 is to provide some rationale for why you decided to give feedback on that particular part and that particular feedback on that part of the task. One other thing I'll mention before you go, or sorry, as soon as you get into breakout rooms, there's sort of like a step 0 is look at what your breakout group number is, because you're going to go ahead and then make sure that you fill out the slide that corresponds to it. So you'll see at the top of each one of these slides that look like this, it says the group number there, and you'll fill in your names and then use that slide to complete the task.
Hey, John, I'm so sorry to interrupt you, but the slides aren't shared for anyone with the link to edit. And I tried to, but I don't own them. So you're going to have to do that for people.
I will do that right now.
Okay,
So,
sorry about that.
oh, thank you. That's pretty important. So why don't we have, and this is the group name thing I was talking about. Libby, why don't you go ahead and send people into the breakouts in just a moment. You're going to have about 10 minutes. We'll give you about a 1-minute warning when the 10 minutes are almost up, when we're at about 9 minutes. And I'll pop into different rooms just to see how things are going and make sure that everybody's okay. And again, you could also chat Libby at MBPS. We're just sort of finishing up your but can you share a little bit about what you decided as far as feedback is concerned?
Yes, sorry. So we were working on student B, and we had said that student B, they didn't really add in the diagrams that they needed to. And so one of the feedback that we would give them was that they actually need to show the diagram. So we, even though they gave us like a written response as to what should be happening at each stage, We want to make sure that they actually understand what's happening. And then another thing we said we would do was to actually give them a visual, to maybe provide an example. That way they can actually see. Maybe they were a little confused or they didn't really know what we were asking for. And this way they can mimic what we are showing them and give us their representation that way.
Yeah, I love that. Like super targeted, and I like the idea of doing the visual or that example of what it might look like. And I think you could do that maybe with a diagram like from a different topic, or there are multiple opportunities in this task. So maybe just help them with that first one so they have a better idea of what to do. Thank you for sharing that. I really appreciate it. And I also want to mention, this was interesting that came up a couple of days ago in a session or yesterday when we had a session with living environment teachers, because there's a similar thing to student work, is they're like, well, maybe they just didn't know how to submit the photo, or like they didn't understand how to use the technology. And so I thought that was worth bringing up, because you might just ask the student, do you know how to do, like, do you know how to actually insert the photo? So, but I love your suggestion as well. That's a really great one. Let me see.
Can I just say something?
Sure.
I have shared with my students, there is a video online that shows how to upload work online in a Google Classroom and other, and it's like 3 minutes video, and it's very helpful, and I can share it with you once we are out from this meeting.
I think that would be amazing. Yeah, I think others in the group would hopefully find that very useful as well. We've done similar things with our curriculum website as also, and people have said they found it useful. So I'm going to ask one more group. I don't know if maybe just didn't have a chance to fill in the slides, or perhaps you commented on the document. But if one more group could volunteer to just share out what they decided as far as feedback, or what they were discussing at least. Just feel free to unmute yourself and talk.
For me, student A did a good job.
I did a good job. Was there anything that you would provide feedback about?
So I think he followed the instruction, all the instruction, and his conclusion seemed to be very, very, like very good.
Good. I mean, sometimes positive feedback is the appropriate feedback. Anybody else have a quick comment about what they discussed?
My group was looking at student A as well, and student A definitely filled out and followed the directions about making all the drawings and explaining. The only thing that we noticed is that there was a misconception in the last drawing where the gas molecules weren't really filling the whole entire container. And that misconception was carried out to the last diagram as well. So that was the one point that we kind of got stuck on, like, oh, they have the right idea, but we can definitely deepen their understanding by letting them know gas molecules take on the whole volume of the container. They don't just hang out in the middle. So that was...
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And I agree with the last comment before that, that student A did a really good job. But I think that also provides an opportunity to really help them deepen their understanding even further by giving them feedback like what you just suggested. I also, as far as like diagrams or creating models, there was one other criteria that that student didn't hit, is labeling stuff. I think he or she did in that the first diagram, but didn't really do that throughout the rest of them. So that, again, is just another opportunity to, like, in this case, deepen their understanding of how to like create really strong diagrams that represent their ideas. All right, so thank you so much for engaging with that. Everybody did an excellent job, and sorry if there was a little bit of confusion, but everybody did great. All right, so some final notes before we go, about next steps and feedback. So we have office hours that are not already scheduled, but we are available for that. If that's something that you need, go ahead and reach out to either myself or Libby, or some of you might know Kieran that works with us as well. And we will be glad to meet with you on Zoom and be a thought partner or support for whatever it is that you need support with. I showed you the remote learning website earlier in the presentation. We're going to be updating those about every 3 weeks, so stay tuned. In about the next week or two, there'll be some new learning plans. I'm not sure there'll be another chemistry one just yet, but I'm trying my best to balance between earth science and chemistry, and I hope to put something up there soon. And then just stay tuned for the next webinar as well. We haven't scheduled those yet, but there should be some webinars before the school year is up. We still have some time for that for sure. This is a slide that we've been asked to show that, interestingly, even during this pandemic time, New Visions is hiring. So we don't want to encourage people to leave their school, but if you're interested in a different opportunity, or if you know